Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to from the Atlantic Charter to Pearl Harbor to today. My name is Randy Barber, and I'm the chairman of the International Churchill Society Canada, and I will host and MC this evening's program. The International Churchill Society Canada, the Churchill Society for the Advancement of Parliamentary Democracy, the Nato Association of Canada, and the Crow's Nest Naval Officers Club in St. John's, Newfoundland, were all sponsors of our recent film called Mysterious Visitors, which showed on August 14th past. And tonight is the promised follow-up to that worldwide viewing. One may watch it again, and I'll have something more to say about an available DVD for you in just a moment. But let's move right into the program. But first, I should tell you that you will have an opportunity to ask a question. We won't be able to have too many of them, but you will have an opportunity to do that. You should see it at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A. And if you click on that, you can then put a question in, and we will, at the end of our presentation and at the end of our speakers' presentations, we will then cover off the questions and have the applicable individual respond to them. So I just want you to know that. So please put your thinking caps on. We're pleased to welcome as our first speaker, Peter Russell, the producer of the film, who will speak to our directly to our topic tonight. Please, Peter, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Randy, and ladies and gentlemen who are listening. I'm going to talk about the charters, plural, the Atlantic Charters, plural. I'm going to tell, in the time given to me, a tale of two charters. Now, some of you may have forgotten or not noticed an event that took place a few months ago in June 14th of this year, when leaders of democracies, democratic countries, were holding a G7, a summit conference at Plymouth on the south coast of England. And at that summit, the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and American President Joe Biden got together, just the two of them. They slipped away to sign what they refer to as the new Atlantic Charter. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the two and compare them and contrast them. The one that Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt constructed, notice that word construct, they didn't sign, they never did sign. They constructed in August 1941 in Saint-Tropez, and the one that Boris Johnson and Joe Biden drew up 80 years later. Both charters have this in common. They were in response to crises facing the free world. The summer of 1941 was the darkest moment in World War II. It seemed likely that if the United States did not enter the war, the Nazis would triumph. Churchill's aim in risking his life and the lives of his top military commanders to cross the North Atlantic to meet the American president in Newfoundland waters, his purpose was to persuade Roosevelt to bring his country into the war. Although, as I think you all know, Churchill did not achieve that goal, he did get Roosevelt's promise of all the material support a formerly neutral country could give. The meetings Most important achievement, however, was the production of the Atlantic Charter. And what was it? It was a statement of the principles on which the leaders of the world's two most powerful democracies aim to build a new world order after the defeat of tyranny. That's the context for the Atlantic Charter that we all know so well. Now, in the spring of this year, the democratic world was emerging from the regime of an American president whose American first policy threatened the solidarity of the free world at a time when autocracy is on the rise worldwide. There's also a time when humanity faces existential threats to its very existence and to the livability of its planet. Threats that could not have been imagined 80 years ago. Excuse me. Despite these differences of context, there's still a great deal of correspondence between each charter's 8 articles. I think it's pretty clear that Biden and Johnson had that charter that we all know so well, the first charter before them, in front of them when they wrote their new Atlantic Charter this year. Now, so let me just briefly take you through the 2 charters. The first 3 articles of the 1941 Charter deal with democratic principles without speaking the word democracy. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? They call for the end of imperialism and recognize the right of all peoples to self-government. Now, for Winston Churchill, a firm believer in the British Empire, this was a huge concession to the Americans' rejection of European colonialism. The new charter's first article, in contrast to the old one, expresses resolve, quote unquote, to defend the principles, values, and institutions of democracy and open society. So there's the D word, democracy. And goes on to call for the defense of the inherent dignity and human rights of all individuals, language lacking in its predecessor. In its third article, the signatories of the new charter declare their commitment to meet contemporary threats to the principles of, quote, sovereignty, threats to sovereignty and territorial integrity that arise from new technologies, including interference through disinformation or other malign influences. Now, on the economic front, there are interesting differences between the 2 charters, too. The 1941 Charter's 4th article supports free trade, but subject to the 2 countries' existing obligation. And in Churchill's case, that meant the preservation of Britain's protectionist program of imperial preferences, which is a violation of free trade. While the contemporary charter's 4th article gives a nod to open markets, it begins with a pledge, and I quote, to harness and protect our innovative edge in science and technology. Both charters call for, that's the end of quote, both charters call for high labor standards, but the 6th article of the new charter also commits to a, quote, fair, climate-friendly, sustainable ago, Churchill and Roosevelt, they wouldn't know what a sustainable global economy while protecting the environment. Both charters call for collective security to build and maintain peace in the world. Churchill and Roosevelt, in their 8th and final article of their charter, look towards, I quote, the abandonment of the use of force, end of quote. That's something, isn't it? The abandonment of the use of force. Biden and Johnson, having lived in the nuclear age and leading democracies that up to now reject unilateral disarmament, are more hard-headed. In the 5th article of the charter, quote, they quote, to the defense of NATO, end of quote. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, after World War II, to counter the military threat of communist Russia, which has replaced Nazism as the greatest threat to democracy. The nature of that threat has changed. A Russian regime that is not communist, but simply autocratic, threatens a democratic Ukraine to its west and Balkan democracy, where it not would have its way with these democracies. Robert Baines, with us tonight, the president of the Canadian NATO Association, will have something to say about that, I'm sure, after my talk later on. Neither charter, it's interesting, neither refers to the UN, to the United Nations. But the final article of the 1941 charter does call for, a quote from the first charter, quote, the establishment of a wider and permanent system of general security, end of quote. The Japanese attack on American bases at Pearl Harbor 80 years ago today, followed by Adolf Hitler's declaration of war on the United States, prompted Churchill and Roosevelt to convene a meeting in London on the first day of January 1942, at which representatives of 26 countries subscribed to the Atlantic Charter by signing the United Nations Declaration. So there's the Atlantic Charter leading directly to the founding of the UN. In their charter, Biden and Johnson make no reference to the UN, nor did they present their charter at the G7 summit taking place in Plymouth at the same time they were working on their charter. I think we should all pray that this does not mean the UK and USA have given up on the UN playing an important role in maintaining global security. The final 2 articles of the new 2021 Atlantic Charter recognize, quote, the climate crisis, end of quote, and, quote again, the catastrophic impact of health crises. We certainly know what that's all about, don't we? But they have nothing to suggest as to how to, quote, strengthen our collective defenses, end of quote, against these crises. That is a nice updating of threats to our species and our planet. However, I yearn for a more hard-headed recognition of the need to explore the global institutions needed to deal effectively with threats to our very existence. I'm going to stop there. I hope you've now got the flavor of the 2 charters, my tale of 2 charters, how they compare and contrast, and their strengths and their weaknesses, Randy. And I thought that would set us off with at least knowing substance when we celebrate the charters, what we're talking about. And Nancy Key was the inspiration for turning Agnes Marie Walsh's play, which we'd had at the 75th anniversary of the Atlantic Charter, into a film. And she co-directed that film with Agnes Walsh. And I'd like her to say a few words about how she got the brainwave, and I think it was a real brainwave, and turned the play into a film, and her experience in directing it. So Nancy, I call on you.
Well, thank you. Yes, as Peter said, I certainly, my late husband George and I loved our trip to Newfoundland and the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the signing of the Charter. And we saw the play in Placentia Bay, le Théâtre d'Héritage de Placentia Bay. And I thought, you know, so few people know about this, and it's such an interesting aspect of things that happened, not in Canada, because of course Newfoundland wasn't part of Canada at that point. But I thought, people, wouldn't it make an interesting film? And then other people said, oh my goodness, no, you know, you'll never get the money, you can't do this, you can't do that. And many other things happened. So I gave up the idea until Peter said to me, how would you like to direct the film with Agnes Marie Walsh? And I thought, yay, this is what I've been looking for. Exactly. So thank you, investors. It was marvelous to be able to do it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And Agnes and I worked well. She organized, she didn't actually direct, but she organized all the Newfoundland group. And Amy Small, Wilson Small, directed it, and Michel Lecoeur was the audio person. Now I was a bit stuck because this is still pandemic time, as you know, and we had a deadline of August the 14th. And I thought, originally I thought that it would be interesting to have H.V. Morton standing down in somewhere near our harbor, leaning, because of course in the play that we'd seen, H.V. Morton was constantly on stage, slightly off stage by a ship's railing. Well, given our weather and various other things, I suddenly thought, you know, if we rewrite Morton into the past tense, I mean, because when he was actually doing it in Newfoundland, he was talking in the present tense, as if he was actually on board at that time. But I thought, let's put him in the Arts and Letters Club. And they very kindly agreed, despite the fact that nobody else was allowed in the club at that time. And then I had to find a cinematographer. And I was lucky enough to find someone who had a lot of experience. And Julian, of course, was very kind and said, yes, he would like to play that role. So that's how it all worked. And we took one day to shoot it all in the club. But the idea was that we rewrote, with Agnes's permission, I rewrote his part to put it as if he were talking to a guest whom no one was supposed to know who it was, who in the club, and he was telling her about what had happened. So that's why we were situated in the Arts and Letters Club. And that, I think, is probably all you want to know for the moment.
Well, thank you, Nancy. And again, there may be questions, so that's wonderful. And Peter, let me just say to you that no one analyzes history like you do, certainly. And your comparison of the two charters helped us all to better understand them both. So that was very helpful, segueing into Nancy, who now brought us a little more, and in a way introduced our next speaker, who threaded that story together in the film Mr. Julian Mulock, I'm sorry, an actor who portrayed H.V. Morton, as mentioned already, a guest and friend of Sir Winston Churchill, who wrote the definitive book on the Atlantic meeting. So please go ahead, Julian. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and hello, everyone. I'm just a guy who was brought in to do a job, so I can't be very inspirational. But I have to say, it was a very interesting challenge because we had a very limited time and obviously under very odd circumstances, because we were allowed into the club. The club was officially closed and the whole world was closed at that point. So we it was a slightly guerrilla operation. And the script was much longer than I expected it to be. So I kind of regret that I couldn't learn it all by heart in the time. So to me, well, okay, just very quickly. Today is the first time that I've watched the film from the beginning to the end, because I like many people, I do not enjoy listening to or looking at myself. So I found it very awkward to watch, but I've let enough months pass by now that I was able to sit back and look at it separately. And the first thing I have to say is Nancy did an extraordinary job of writing something that sounded conversational. And if you try to write something, just a straight journal of an event, it's hard to be conversational. I felt very comfortable with it. So I was able to sort of put in some chuckles and some, moments which I enjoyed. But looking at it today, what I really loved was the texture between the sort of slightly snotty Englishman who knew everything. Well, he didn't know everything, but he knew a lot more than the Newfoundlanders did by the time he was in the situation. And I love his revelations as he realizes that really is Churchill on the deck there, or in the railway station. And then later, that really is the president and the whole pomp and ceremony. As in contrast to these wonderful local people who have no idea what's going on. And this family around the table speculating on what's going on. And also the interesting dynamic of the young one who wants to join up and get in there, and the others who are hesitant. So it was a wonderful experience for me, and Nancy and the production, the cameraman and his daughter who ran the teleprompter kept my script moving. We had a really good day. It was a good time, and thank you for having me here today, and thank you for including me in this lovely film.
Julian, who was that woman under the hat that you were talking to in your club?
Well, she's the anonymous guest, and you will never know, Peter. But let me say that she is on camera right now, but I'm not going to tell you who she is.
Okay.
Well hidden, Julian. And if you don't like to listen to your own voice or look at yourself, then I would suggest you never become a politician. Just a bit of free advice for you. Let me finally introduce Robert Baines, who is chairman of the NATO Association of Canada, who will wrap up our program from the standpoint of speakers. But stay tuned, because there likely will be some questions afterwards. Robert, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Randy. One correction, I am actually the president, not the chair. Our chair is the Honorable David Collinette, who also has quite a few historic elements to his name as well. But I've got to tell you, being there in Placentia Bay this summer was a true joy. And I would like to give a thanks to Catherine Langley Hope, who is, I believe, on the line today, for helping to make that happen, that I could help represent the NATO Association there. And I actually was able to give a word of greeting, which Barry Davenport had arranged from the ambassador of the United States to Canada. So that that is always something which is terrific. And it's really at the heart of what our organization, the NATO Association, is always trying to do, which is draw attention of Canadians to the friendship, the fraternity of not only the US and Canada, but the US, Canada, United Kingdom, all of the other NATO members. There are 30 together. And it's that kind of camaraderie that the video really brings about. You really see this collaborative endeavor in the descriptions of the greetings, and the collaboration between all of the ships and the flotillas. It really comes out, and that's exactly what happens even today at our regular NATO meetings, which for most people, they never even know that they're going on. But that is the constant work, that constant polish between all of these different actors who have a lot of competing interests to deal with. But when push comes to shove, they get together and say something very simple, which is an attack upon one is an attack upon all. And that's that collective security element that Peter was talking about. It all came from this very simple document. It's simple in that it only takes up a few paragraphs, but as far as the history of the world is concerned, what a monumental shift. We're mentioning the challenges with colonialism that were essentially burdened at the beginning of this discussion, where Churchill did not want to actually give that as an element that people should be able to self-determine. But even today, this minute, President Biden and the head, of course, of Russia, Mr. Putin, were speaking over the phone or video link. And they're talking about the exact same principle. Should Ukraine be able to determine its own future? Should it be able to decide whether it wants to join something like NATO or not? Mr. Putin, of course, is pushing very strongly that it should not be able to do. But these principles are constantly in the news. And I would just implore everyone who's on this call and anyone who sees this video to stay up on the current events, to remind your fellow Canadians that what we have as far as the New World Order that Peter was mentioning was being heralded by this document, by the Atlantic Charter, it's something new in the history of the world. And it's amazing, the collaborative endeavor, the idea that this is a non-zero sum collaboration in most of these multilateral institutions. The UN, NATO, the Bretton Woods organizations of financial stability, the International Justice group of institutions, so the International Criminal Court, etc. These are all based on the idea that together we could do more than we ever could separately. And I think that that was the one huge lesson, painful lesson, that we learned out of the 1930s. What was it that Churchill said, Randy? Everyone hopes that if he keeps feeding the alligator won't eat him. That is the one big lesson that we learned, and that together, as long as we don't let the small but very, real differences that we can have with our allies, as long as we don't let those tear us apart, we can take on so many different challenges. And Peter, you were mentioning, of course, the environmental challenge, so many other issues that are facing us as a species, dealing with new technology, health crises, how to deal with artificial intelligence. These are huge issues. And what you really need are these collaborative endeavors like NATO, which are flexible. That's the one thing that I'd like to leave us with now, is just to remind you that this Atlantic Charter was very general in a lot of different ways. And the NATO treaty itself, taking its cue from the Atlantic Charter, it's only 4 pages, essentially, or 2 pages double-sided. And it's that simplicity, that ability to be flexible, that ingenuity, wherein you want to be as understanding of sovereignty that can be put up against collaboration at the same time. It's that balance which makes it work. And I'm really thrilled looking at it from the historical lens where NATO is going right now, because it's all dependent on resilience, on being able to respond, to anticipate, but also more importantly, to respond and maintain the security that so many Canadians have taken for granted. Maybe I'll just mention one more thing, the taking for granted aspect. Everyone here, I think, loves history. That's why we're here. We love, a lot of us, Mr. Churchill from the bottom of our bones. We've got this innate interest in what happens to these ideas. And I would really implore you to keep supporting the Churchill Society. The NATO Association of Canada is trying to educate Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO, but also more generally the rules-based international order. I think you will have seen probably in the past few years, you've got a lot of the younger generation thinking that our world is, in a collision course for calamity, which it's generally been that way for a long time in many different ways. The challenge is that they don't see the span of time. They cannot compare what we have now with what we did 100 years ago. And that is one of the things we're trying to bring about is an understanding of this great ascent through multilateralism to the world we have today, compared to any number of different measurements that you could peg on the world in, say, the 1920s, whether that be infant mortality or education or women in the workforce, racism, so many different issues that were much worse then. And so I'm trying to push a bit of optimism into the world that our younger generation sees today, because it is amazing what we have accomplished. And although we may be in a challenging situation, our country may not be the paradigm of virtue that you could imagine in a utopia. It is the best that has ever been, by all likes and comparisons, I think. And it's the best one that we can hope for, I think, as far as collaboration, pushing forward, admitting our mistakes, and course correcting. So I'll just leave it there, but this video helped bring up so many of those issues, and I can't thank Nancy, Peter, Julian, and you, Randy, as well as Barry Davenport, who helped kick off the whole thing, and Catherine Langley Hope, and I'm sure lots of others, but just such a wonderful thing to get this out there to Canadians.
Well, thank you, Robert, and no truer words were spoken. Thank you for your broad overview of what NATO is doing. Did you want to say anything about Ukraine at the present time?
Sure. I mean,
Yes.
right now,
Yeah.
Secretary of State Blinken, United States Secretary of State, and President Zelensky had a conversation on Monday. The key here is that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. It was understood by the Russians for the past 3 decades that Ukraine would never be a part of NATO. And so that is an idea that was based on a sphere of influence idea. I think most of the Eastern European countries that have joined NATO have done so with great joy, with a huge amount of their population approving of the move. NATO's idea on this has always been that a population should decide what the country does. It should not be decided by some outside power, a hegemon of any kind. And at the same time, it is in a very tricky situation. Mr. Putin has made it, I think, quite clear that he sees this as a bit of a red line. Mr. Biden has made it equally clear that they also see it as a red line, and they will defend Ukraine. To what extent has not been exactly made clear, but in a greater way than was made in 2014. Yes. Those words were spoken. So right now, it is a very tense situation. The greatest thing that I think Canada can do is to buttress our allies, and particularly the United States, in making sure that there is a united front. The EU is on board with this. The NATO defense ministers have been consulting. The foreign affairs ministers just met last week. So that is what I'm glad to see, and I think it is the best strategy in a moment where we do not know exactly what the designs are of Mr. Putin. The best thing we can do is to show our resolve, That is exactly what NATO is built for, to show that we are not going to waver. You're not going to get away with taking another slice out of a country. That is no longer how we do it. We may wish that Peter's mentioning of, how was it exactly, Peter, giving up violence or giving up war as a means to an end?
Mhm.
You mean
In
in the
the
first,
exactly in the first version.
yes, they were really committed to the end of war,
Mm.
and that's a lovely idea, and
So
but it didn't happen.
but I think, well, I mean, it has happened by and large, state on state war. Most of the wars that go on now are civil wars, and that is quite a change. But here, what we were doing now is to try to push that principle that the US is trying to coordinate a series of sanctions of individuals within Mr. Putin's regime. And what the idea of making sure that we are coordinated shows is that he would not be able to get away with significant shooting war. Whether that'll work, it's anybody's guess. But that is, I think, a sound strategy, given that we can all stay together and stay pointed in the same direction.
Well, thank you, Robert, for your insight there. Very helpful, and I'm sure are interested in what you had to say about that. I'm going to now ask if there's some questions that have come up. Now, Kate, I'm not sure how would you read those to me, or would you show me them on a split screen? How would I get to those questions?
Yes, I actually sent them to you via chat, but I can also read them if you prefer that.
Should I go to chat then and see what I get?
Yeah,
Okay.
if you check my most recent message.
Okay, I'm clicking on chat. I'm not getting anything. Oh, hang on. There it is. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take 2 or 3 of them here. Let me start off to the host and panelists from Barry. The question is, would you agree that at the meeting in 1941 and recently in the Biden-Johnson meeting, the reality is that Americans want the benefits of international order without doing the hard work of building and maintaining it?
Oh.
Who?
Uh,
Peter, would you have something to say to that one?
I think Barry struck a note, made an important point with his question. I still find, although that Biden, who's not just an improvement over Trump, he's a kind of president we want in the United States. Sort of takes for granted the U.S. alliance with other democracies. He doesn't really work at it very much. Not enough for my taste. So that's what I would say to Barry. I think they're still too U.S. centric.
mhm.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else want to add this short comment? All right, let's go to the next question. It's an interesting one, a trivia question. Was it true that the Governor General of Newfoundland Labrador was invited and had tea aboard the Prince of Wales with Churchill and FDR? That's the question. I don't know the answer.
Neither do I, sadly.
I don't remember him being there when I was there, but I don't remember everything.
Thank you, Julian. All right, well, it's something we'll have to do a little research on.
I think he did.
Okay.
I wrote a little book on it for Newfoundland, and I think it's in that book. It's on my shelf. I don't want to hold proceedings up, but I think he did.
All right, well, that will have to do for the time being. We'll try and get it.
So this one is for Julian. What did you do to prepare for this role? And what other acting roles have you had that are most significant to you? And were you born in England? Full roster of questions.
I'll start with the last. I was born in England, but of Canadian parents. So I grew up in England, but I was always on my way to Canada. Preparing acting, I'm not a full-time professional actor at all. I've done a lot of acting in community theatre and directing in community theatre. I've done a tiny bit of paid acting and a bit of film, but mostly stage. Preparing for the role, I think it's in my soul to a certain extent. Morton is the kind of Englishman I'm interested in. And there are a lot of Englishmen I'm not interested in, and I'm glad I'm 3,000 miles away from them. But I have to say, I was saying earlier before everyone joined us that I was aware of the Atlantic Chapter, and I knew that it was a Churchill-Roosevelt meeting, but I knew very little about the content. And in fact, the circumstances of it, the Newfoundland connection. So reading the script and reading some other material thrilled me historically. I cannot say that this was a great acting performance, but it was lovely material to work with. So really, yeah, it was the script. And thank you for the question.
Awesome. And now this one is for Peter. So you and Sue traveled to Placentia Bay to speak live, notwithstanding the pandemic concerns. What was the reaction to you personally making this trip to commemorate this special anniversary on August 14th?
Well, it was full of risk because of where we stayed. There used to be a wonderful hotel called the Newfoundland, something, but it's been taken over by Sheridan. And when we got there, the elevators weren't working. The hotel was absolutely full. And so they crammed us into the freight elevator, packed like sardines. And we go up 3 or 4 floors, no masks. They'd had a very good period in the pandemic, very few cases, and they were unduly optimistic. Other than that, we loved the whole outing, and it was all very, very good. And we went out there with Newfoundlanders, and I always enjoy being with them. They're lots of fun.
I thought then, if we may, we've answered 4 or 5 questions. If I may wrap it up, go ahead, please.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Good evening.
Absolutely wonderful to hear the retrospective. And I think it's really important for us, as Robert was saying, that we remember our history and we share our history. Next week, a lady who is the last surviving Bletchley Park Enigma decoder here in Canada, who originally is from England, but met a Canadian pilot who eventually didn't fly her here, sent her by ship, will be coming to a NATO event to honor NATO. I also think it's important for Canadians to learn more and more about our contributions. There's a wonderful history in Toronto that unfortunately was almost erased, called Bomb Girls. And there were almost 8,000 young Canadian women who were building munitions and bombs, also under the War Measures Act, just like this lady, Madge Janes Trull, who will be 100 in July and is sharp as a tack and charming and delightful. She finally was able to tell her story. Because it was under the War Measures Act, the Canadian government destroyed most of the information about those young women, and they were, you know, women between sort of 20 and 45 who are doing this kind of work. And I really want to ask everybody to share any stories they have, to make sure you continue to let young people know how they can contribute, how you never know that one gesture, one word, one look, but also sharing and caring. And as Robert said, being flexible and adaptable. If we think of ourselves in the world as a family, then that's what we need to do in order to evolve and continue. And yes, there can be disagreements, there can be difficulties. We all have to remember at one time, actually, Russia was being considered to join NATO. So I think it's really important for all of us. And I want to thank all of you for all the work you did for this film. And I think it's so important. And we're going to work hard with the Atlantic Charter Committee and the Churchill Foundation and the Churchill Society to promote this, because it's interesting how what people consider to be family kinds of television or family kinds of films like Coronation Street or like All in the Family are a way of sharing with each other as we evolve. So I want to thank everybody. I want to tell you, I'm very honored to be part of the NATO Association of Canada, and I'd like to welcome lots of you to join us. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Catherine. Let me wrap things up, I think, if I may. Robert, is there any more questions that need to be answered?
There was just one for me about Ukraine joining NATO. I think I already kind of addressed that a little bit. I don't think it's something that's dangling in between the parties right now. So who knows? I could not prognosticate that.
Well, it's a very timely thing. I was just reading things about it this morning's paper. So you brought us up to date for sure. Prior to closing, ladies and gentlemen, may I appeal to each and every one of you to kindly assist us with a donation to help cover our production costs of Mysterious Visitors. Simply go to the International Churchill Society Canada website and click on the bright red donate button, where you may use either PayPal or a credit card. For a $30 donation, you will receive a DVD of Mysterious Visitors, and which would make an excellent holiday gift, I think, for under the tree for a number of people. And for a $50 donation, along with the DVD, you will also receive a wonderful frameable copy, a certificate, and on the back, an actual copy of the Atlantic Charter. Both of them are frameable and would again look very, very good in to fill that space in your family room, certainly that needs a little something to balance your other certificates. Let me also be sure to thank one more time all of our panelists. And I would also like to especially thank Kate Farron, who is an intern with the NATO Association, who has been our technical guru, arranging and conducting our Zoom tonight. So Kate, it's been a treasure to work with you. Thank you for all you did. Thank you for all you've done. And thank you for all you will do, both for the societies and for the NATO Association of Canada. We certainly appreciate it very, very much. So I think we'll wrap it up now. We've been forward to doing something on the 85th anniversary of the construction of the Atlantic Charter, as Peter has told us. And the Atlantic Charter Committee, I believe, will continue to work as we did in the last 5 years. We will continue to work over the next 5 years to put something together again to commemorate this most important document. So thank you once again, all, and good night.